Good morning, everyone. Sorry, colleagues, I think we're going to start our conference for today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for the second day of our conference on skills mobility partnerships. Good morning to all online participants as well. Before providing you with an overview for today's conference, I will give the floor to my colleague Gregoire, who will actually introduce the day and present you with a few practical information.
Thanks a lot, Daphne, and good morning to everyone. Great to see you physically and online. I'm Gregoire Duchamp from Enabel, the Belgian development agency. So a few practical elements. Translation, as you can see here, but also online, this event is translated. So for online participants, you can click on the headphone button close to the volume button. I'm not sure exactly what I'm talking about, but you should find it, I hope. Don't hesitate if you have any question to ask it on the chat. For the participants present here, physically, you can find it on the seat. On the left side of your seat, you can open Magic Box and you will find headphones. This is for translation. I think for translation, the first is Dutch, the second is French, and the third is English. But you will find your way, certainly. Second point regarding questions. We hope to have a lively event with questions, remarks, and really, a lively session as much as possible with interaction with you online, with you also, of course, present. For online participants, you have two chats. For technical issues, there is a private chat, and for question and answers, let's say, or reactions, please use the public chat. For the ones here present physically, you will have to raise your hand physically, and we will pass by with a microphone. Some colleagues will pass by directly with a microphone. Okay, I think that's okay for the translation. For the documents, you received a beautiful bag when entering. You will find all the documents inside. So for the participants here present physically, for the ones present online, you will find it on the handout tab somewhere, handout tab in your browser. It's perfect. All the presentations will be published or are published already on the EMN Belgium website, so you should find your way also certainly this manner. Also, we'd like to have a very interactive sessions, as I mentioned. So some panelists prepare polling questions. We would like you to intervene, to give your ideas, your thought about elements that, issues that were important while implementing projects as such in the last years. So you receive in the tote bag, there is a big, very big QR code close to the agenda. So you should scan it and you will have access directly to the polling. We will remind it several times to you during this morning. But for the participant online, it should appear somewhere on the chat. Also the direct link to the polling. Is there any questions, remarks at this stage, practical elements?
I think you covered pretty much all the housekeeping information.
Perfect.
Thank you, Gregoire. So yesterday we had a comprehensive discussion about the talent partnerships, the value add of the skills mobility partnerships, looking, of course, at the challenges also to come up with labor mobility schemes that are actually feasible and sustainable on the longer run. Today, we will actually unpack the conversation that we had yesterday, and we will zoom on the situation in Belgium. After the welcoming remarks, we will actually have a presentation of the mapping made by my colleagues from the European Migration Network on the skills mobility partnerships implemented in Belgium. And that will lead us to a panel discussion about the lessons learned from the pilots that are currently implemented by Enabel, by the GIZ, and by IOM. I hope that you can stay with us, because that actually will allow us to then have this interactive Q&A session with the polling questions that Gregoire just mentioned. Please already have a look at the polling questions, because that would be really good for us to already have the results of these surveys to actually feed into our panel discussion. After the lunch break in the afternoon, we will actually look at and discuss the elephant in the room, which is basically how to bring talents to employers, so how to bridge that gap. We had already a bit of a conversation yesterday about that key challenge. This actually will allow us to have, again, an interactive panel discussion. Following this panel discussion, we will also have an interesting wrap-up of the day, from practice to policy. So please stay with us. And we will close the day with some remarks from Enabel. Voilà, this is the menu for today. I would like to actually invite Maryse Habib, the Chief of Mission of IOM Country Office for Belgium and Luxembourg, to give her welcoming remarks. Maryse, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daphne. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me extend a warm welcome to you all from the International Organization for Migration. We're thrilled to see the extent to which the topic of skills mobility partnerships has mobilized such active involvement from partners, stakeholders here in the room and also online. It's great to now be able to be back in person and have some of these conversations face-to-face. And thank you to all of you who've also joined us online, as it allows us to enrich the conversation and make sure that everyone is able to chip in where they want. So we're thrilled to be here. I'll start by thanking our colleagues from the European Migration Network Belgium and from Enabel, the Belgian Development Agency, for the precious collaboration that allowed to bring together such a diverse and broad range of participants invested in skills mobility partnerships at the local, national, and international levels. It's through collaborations like these that we can truly move the needle on such important topics. IOM's Country Office for Belgium and Luxembourg has been working for a few years on the topic of labor and skills mobility, including through projects such as the Match Project, which is co-organizing this national conference today. From our perspective, skills mobility partnerships strongly contribute to the development of sending countries, the growth of receiving countries, and embody the meaning of orderly migration management for the benefit of all, which, as you know, is IOM's motto, so to say. From the perspective of countries of destination, and in particular Belgium, skills mobility partnerships are part of a broader strategy to address structural labor market shortages, together with the activation and upscaling of the domestic labor force, which includes migrants and displaced persons already in the territory. It's important that as we think about the national labor force, that we also consider that it includes nationals, migrants, displaced persons who've been accepted into the territory, and that our policies are not exclusive to one group or another. In that perspective, IOM welcomes the proposal of the European Commission to establish partnerships with third countries with the view to strengthen cross-regional cooperation in the field of labor migration and develop an EU-wide framework for sustainable labor and skills mobility. Talent partnerships represent an encouraging prospect, which will shape the EU's move from piloting labor migration schemes towards the establishment of more structured and sustainable pathways. This being said, to be successful, such a framework will need to consider migrants at all skill levels and focus on promoting mutually beneficial labor migration pathways. So we can't cherry pick those and those that we want to bring into the country. I think it's very important that we genuinely consider that there are needs at all levels and that there are supplies at all levels, and that we match that in order to genuinely arrive at mutually beneficial solutions. Only by taking into account the external dimension of labor mobility policies can talent partnerships established in Europe also harness the positive development outcomes for the countries of origins contributing talents to Europe. It's important to consider both sides of this equation. In that sense, it will be important for EU migration policy to synchronize with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is our collective commitment to advancing our global benefit for all. IOM believes that skills mobility partnerships should be developed with countries that anticipate a surplus in their qualified labor force nationally. For example, in the MATCH project, the capacity building activities have a focus on enhancing the capacity of national stakeholders in countries of origin to manage the different stages of labor migration schemes, which includes the skills forecasting to allow them to identify where they may have a surplus and genuinely make decisions based on this, and the pre-departure orientation of the would-be migrants to ensure that the skills themselves and the talents who are being sent abroad are aware of what they're embarking onto and their contribution that's expected both to their receiving country and their home country. We believe that exchanges of best practices between European public employment services and genuine reflection with sending countries around labor market surplus is of critical importance to ensuring that we do not fuel the so-called brain drain. IOM's skills mobility partnership approach to labor migration can offer useful models to the EU to frame the EU talent partnership. Through formalized bilateral or regional interstate cooperation, IOM's model focuses on multi-sided and multi-stakeholder partnerships between labor migration entities in origin and destination countries. Importantly, it places the skills development of migrants and their local communities at the heart of skills mobility schemes so that they truly can be mutually beneficial. Such an approach benefits origin countries as they gain skills and employment prospects thanks to placements into labor markets or the circular mobility of their qualified labor force. Through the implementation of our pilot projects, IOM Belgium and Luxembourg has documented evidence that talents that have benefited from skills development during their job placements outside of their countries of origin often have enhanced opportunities to return to their home countries with prospects for qualified employment. This is one example of a win-win scenario. So in this particular scheme, we often see that persons who have been placed within Europe and who have benefited also from training opportunities or from short-term employment opportunities here in Europe, when they return to their countries of origin, or should they choose to return to their countries of origin, often can bring up also the labor market on the other side. And this is something that we see as mutually beneficial. This is only one type of scheme where we encourage circular mobility so that the countries benefit from one another. Sending countries contribute to their receiving countries in terms of filling labor market gaps, while simultaneously the receiving or the sending country re-benefits from an enhanced skill set from persons returning. IOM in many contexts also benefits or facilitates such circular mobility schemes with the specific intention of facilitating return of qualified persons in order for them to contribute again to the growth and development of their home countries. So it's very much for IOM a win-win scenario that we need to focus on, and that in our analysis we actually lead to identification of policies that permit this harnessing of the win-win. In addition to addressing the EU internal economic needs and contributing to the development of origin countries, talent partnerships should also build in rights-based considerations to protect migrant workers against all forms of exploitation throughout the labor market cycle. This starts from recruitment and throughout employment and eventual return, should they choose to return. At origin, ethical and fair recruitment practices must become an integrated feature of good labor migration governance. I would like to stress that IOM stands ready to support the EU and its member states in designing and implementing such partnerships. Indeed, IOM has extensive operational and policy experience in this area and is currently supporting various member states with technical expertise in developing national labor mobility strategies to attract talent, as well as providing operational support in implementing labor mobility pathways to Europe. In that sense, I would like to mention in particular 2 DG Home-funded projects. The first, the Match project, which brings us here today alongside EMN and Enabel, comprising 4 EU member states, namely Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Italy, and 2 West African countries, Senegal and Nigeria. And second, the TAM project, which extends to Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, and builds bridges with Belgium and Germany. So these are just examples that IOM is supporting, where IOM is able to support Belgium in doing kind of this matching process and really harnessing and demonstrating the win-win that can come from well-managed migration policies. IOM's experience has highlighted the need to involve all stakeholders in the design of labor mobility schemes. And this is, again, why it's so important that we have so many stakeholders and participants here in the room and online. This ensures that they're sustainable and mutually beneficial. Again, mutually beneficial. We're really stressing the win-win. This is where we see the added value of well-managed governance, well-managed mobility governance. As long as we consider the benefits to both sides of the equation, this is where we can truly find sustainable policies and make sustainable policy decisions. We found that strong engagement with the private sector, including employers from the outside of the scheme, is also key to ensuring appropriate skills matching and buy-in from employers. Finally, IOM's experience has shown that for labor migration to be successful, labor migration policies need to be linked to broader social inclusion policies, including through pre-employment training programs targeting both employers and prospective migrant workers. IOM acknowledges the remarkable efforts deployed by Belgium and other European countries to offer protection and social inclusion to persons displaced by the crisis in Ukraine. This is a best practice which should be replicated to ensure that inclusion efforts similarly leverage the immense contribution other categories of migrant workers and displaced persons can offer to their host countries. To conclude, allow me to reiterate IOM's commitment to work with the EU, its member states, and other stakeholders as part of the joint effort in the policy response to labor migration in Europe. I hope the exchange we'll have here today at this national conference will inspire us to identify the way forward. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Marie, for this really great presentation on the role, the expertise, also the strategy of IOM in terms of skills mobility partnership. I think making really the link with what we discussed yesterday with the talent partnerships, the need to have a sustainable approach, win-win situation, involvement of private sector. So many elements I think that we will, of course, discuss today as well. So thanks a lot. And it's really making the link also, you discussed with about the project implemented by IOM. Really, that's the topic also of the next session that will come. So indeed, we discussed yesterday about the OECD, EMN documents that was published also regarding the experience of skills mobility partnership. And this is also a situation where the EMN Belgium puts energy in defining a mapping exercise of all the actors, the activities, the experiences that we defined in the last years in Belgium. And we have the pleasure now to welcome the 2 next speakers, so Bieke Vens and Sarah de Klerk, so from EMN Belgium, policy officers that will present this mapping exercise, and also making the link with paving the way actually to what we will discuss today during the whole day. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gregoire. Good morning, everyone. Well, we can't start today's presentation without providing you a little background information on how we actually got to this mapping exercise that will serve as a basis for today's discussion. So yesterday, Isabel and Alexander already explained the functioning of the European Migration Network, also called EMN. And to make a very short recap, as an organization composed of national contact points in European countries, we collect and provide information on emerging issues relating to asylum and migration in Europe. So in 2021, the EMN launched a collection of information for the EMN OECD Inform on Skills Mobility Partnerships that was presented yesterday by our colleague Alexander Spiegelfeld. And in that context, EMN, as then real rookies in the field of SMPs, contacted a broad range of national stakeholders. And as the process progressed, it turned out that Belgium seemed to be, and if I may quote my Austrian colleague, a lighthouse in terms of skills mobility partnerships, with two very invested entities, which is IOM and Enabel. So given the complexity and variability of the different project schemes, we decided to conduct a mapping exercise. This exercise served two goals. One was to map the different stakeholders and actors of Belgian skills mobility schemes. The other one was to provide an overview of which actors were involved at the different stages of the schemes. So more specifically, we subdivided the project into 5 stages, as you can see on our slide, which we then further subdivided. So just to point out the main phases, we had the conception phase, the funding phase, then the implementation phase, the evaluation phase, and then we had our conclusions. For every stage, we asked all the stakeholders to, 1, identify in which subdivision of the project that they were involved, 2, to identify which other stakeholders were involved at the same stage of the project, then to identify what their responsibilities and tasks were at that stage, and to identify the gaps and the pitfalls that they had encountered when working on the different projects, and also including the gaps and the pitfalls that prevent the projects from being scaled up. So ultimately, we received feedback from the Flemish Public Government Service, VDAB, from the administrative services of the Flemish government, from the Immigration Office, ICMPD, IOM, Enabel, and we also conducted interviews with other stakeholders to provide further input. It wasn't an easy exercise, I must say, to compare the different schemes and structures, and I remember our office at a certain time being full of those really big papers, full of arrows and colors. But in the end, I think we extracted 4 main pillars that will serve as the basis for today's discussion. And I will leave the floor to my colleague Sarah, who will explain them to you.
Thank you, Bieke. So as Bieke mentioned, we made this exercise, and all of the flip charts and whatnot led to 4 pillars encompassing the main issues that SMPs within Belgium are still facing. The 4 pillars are not standing on their own. They're obviously interacting and interchanging with each other. Maybe to give a bit more information, the first pillar is partnerships. Yesterday, it was also already mentioned by representatives of the European Commission that the Commission wants a change in paradigm in cooperation with non-EU countries, and they want to have that change centered on creating comprehensive, balanced, and tailor-made migration partnerships destined to be mutually beneficial for the different parties involved. These different parties involved are both on the countries of origin end as well as on the countries of destination end, and also within national contexts, focusing on the national, regional, and local level. The second pillar focuses on ownership. Again, a little reference to yesterday, we heard the mantra of employers, 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 and I'm sure it will be repeated several times today. But the mapping shows that the role of the private sector in SMPs varies across the pilot projects. In some projects, employers are the initiators or the creators of the partnership, but in others, they are the beneficiaries of the partnership. In most cases, the public sector still owns the project. Finding the balance between the role of the private and public sector is a key challenge. Thirdly, questions arose on the future outlook of the projects. How can we move from pilot projects to constructive avenues? The lack of perspective in scaling up the projects is one of the main elements that have rendered the Belgian SMP projects perhaps less attractive. However, defining clear ownership roles and building constructive partnerships can pave the way forward to scaling up the projects, which makes scalability our third pillar. And last but not least, the fourth pillar focuses on the regulatory framework. SMPs generally do not have an advantageous regulatory framework, but fit within the larger labor migration framework. Various obstacles such as red tape, lack of visa flexibility, the expensiveness of hiring a third country national make the efficiency and effectiveness of the project sometimes a problem. So rethinking the regulatory and administrative framework could have a significant impact on the future and on the future success of SMPs. The conclusion of our mapping exercise is there is a lot of work to do, but there are also a lot of opportunities still to be seen. The complexity of the different schemes renders the project sometimes difficult, finding and cooperating the right stakeholders, the differences in implementation practices, and much more. There is no clear ownership structure, and there is a problem connecting the public sector and the private sector. But that is one of the main reasons why we are organizing today's conference, and we hope that the networking opportunities will allow you to connect and maybe build constructive already here constructive partnerships. There is also no blueprint for the establishment of partnerships, but from the pilot projects we can draw positive lessons. And in the end, that is also why a pilot remains a pilot project. That is perhaps the best conclusion of the whole mapping exercise. There is a great will to scale up the projects, even though there are many obstacles still to scaling up the projects. The will is there, and we hope that today can inspire you a little bit more to help build SMPs and get them to the next level. But all of this exercise may sound a little bit theoretical, so just to make it a little bit more practical, we will show a short video of Enabel of the PALIM project, and that hopefully will make things a little bit more concrete. But we will have to wait a little bit, I think. And there it is.
Depuis 2 ans, Enabel met en œuvre l'approche innovante du Global Skill Partnership entre le Maroc et la Belgique dans le cadre des projets PALIM et TAM. Le Global Skill Partnership s'adresse à des talents qui ont des diplômes mais qui n'ont pas réussi à trouver leur place dans le marché d'emploi et qui sont donc au chômage.
عندي ماستر spécialisé qualité logicielle من l'université بن طفيل قنيطرة.
lauréat de l'université du littoral Côte d'Opale en France. خريج كلية مدعبة التخصصات الوزارة تخصص الرياضيات والمعلومات التطبيقية. حصلت على شهادة البكالوريا تاعي في سنة 2006 بمدينة العيون. من بعد التحقت في الأقسام التحضيرية للمدارس العليا للمهندسين بمدينة مراكش. حصلت فيها على شهادة ماستر بالضبط في شعبة الكهرباء.
I got my bachelor's degree in mathematics in the faculty of computer and science in Milan.
L'annonce de Enabel où ça permet notamment de faire des reconversions vers le domaine de l'IT.
دوزت تيست تكنيك في ورزازة من بعد صدعوني دوزت يستوغاد مع واحد الجنة كون من الناس اللي بيجيكا والناس ديال ضربك.
Ce que j'ai aimé le plus en fait dans cette formation, ça nous a permis d'acquérir de nouvelles compétences en dehors de ce qui est technique.
Notre encadrant propose à l'INA de faire un projet de fin de formation. Depuis l'analyse, et la conception jusqu'à le déploiement.
عجبني بزاف المراقبه المستمره ديال المشروع من طرف انابيل والكاليتي ديال لي بروفيسور اللي كاينين في الفورماسيون.
Donc l'ANAPEC et son homologue belge, la VDAB, interviennent par la suite après la fin de formation pour assurer le rôle d'intermédiation et des mises en relation avec les entreprises marocaines et les entreprises belges.
Grâce au projet PALIM, j'ai reçu plusieurs offres d'emploi nationales et en Belgique.
انتقلت لواحد الشركه عالميه رائده في المجال ديالها هنا في الدار.
J'occupe un poste de développeur Java J2E.
A big thanks to everyone who did their best to make the PALIM project an enjoyable experience for all of us.
Merci.
So I think we are funding this project. It's a small project, but I think this is the future.
Migration, an issue that features more and more in policy debates.
Okay, so what an inspiring video that we just saw, and I see in the room many of the colleagues that have contributed actually to the implementation of this PALIM project. Very nice to see actually also the talents that have contributed to it. And this is, I think, the perfect transition to now have our panel discussion that will be moderated by Christophe van Hemmerich from the EMN, to actually now dive a little bit more into the lessons learned of the pilot projects implemented by Enabel, by the GIZ, and by IOM. So Christophe, please, over to you and to the guest speakers.
Good morning. Thank you for having been here with us yesterday and today, both online and in person. As was mentioned before, yesterday we zoomed in on the differences between talent partnerships, global skills partnerships, and skills mobility partnerships. We also heard, as Sarah mentioned, that the key was employers, and yes, employers. So I think that the panel of today feeds very well into that narrative. On the one hand, we will really focus on the partnership side, because whether you call it a talent, global skills, skills mobility, they're all about partnerships. Partnerships as a structural collaboration between home and host countries, and partnerships between the different stakeholders within those countries. So today, we will discuss how they are constructed, how the needs of the stakeholders are mapped, and how these partnerships can provide a win-win for both the home and the host countries. After that, we will also discuss the employers, and employers. We will discuss the ownership component of the skills mobility projects. We will discuss how the ownership structures in the partnerships work. What is the role of the private sector? What is the role of the public sector? And incidentally, we will use the discussion to reflect on how these labor avenues can be scaled up. And I'm very happy to be joined here today by three experienced project leads. They have years of experience with skills mobility projects, and they will share that experience with us today. So first, I would very much like to welcome Raffaella Greco-Tonegutti. Since 2018, she's the lead of the human mobility team at Enabel, the Belgian development agency. And Enabel has been very vocal in its support of the global skills partnership approach. It has used the approach for the implementation of its projects, such as we saw, TAM and PALIM, and therefore they emphasize the development side of the mobility schemes. She's joined by Rob de Lopel, the head of the Labor Mobility and Social Inclusion Unit of IOM Belgium and Luxembourg. Over the past years, he initiated several migration schemes between Africa and Belgium and engages actively with private sector partners, including in the Match project. Last but not least, we are also very happy to have Björn Gruber on the panel. In 2013, Björn started working on the Triple Win project. This program has, until now, placed 4,900 foreign nurses with German employers from countries where there is a surplus of qualified experts. Since July 2021, he's the head of the Labor Migration and Skills Partnerships in the GIZ International Services. So, we will start with a partnership-related question. So, Rob, we learned from the presentation that was just given by Bieke and Sarah that these partnerships often include the same actors. So, when IOM started piloting the SMP projects, how did you identify these partners and how did you bring them together?
Yes, thank you, Christophe, and thank you for having me in this panel. Very interesting indeed opening this morning. The question of partnerships is indeed not an easy one, and I think when I go back in time and the initial projects that we launched, it was not so straightforward, to get everybody on board. And as I already explained today, these partnerships generally are quite large in the sense that they indeed comprise, the participating countries and their governments to some extent. They play a role in, securing the visa routes, in backing up, what we will be doing through the project. They contain labor market players, public employment services, and so on in the both countries very often. And then ideally, of course, they also contain the private sector. So I think indeed, if I can share, some of the lessons from what we've learned through these pilot projects, which in the end have been, a possibility for us to explore possibilities around skills partnerships, is that indeed, when talking, for instance, to the private sector, yes, there was initially, especially in Belgium, a clear interest. We talked to, chambers of commerce, sector federations, and so on. These are typically, organizations that represent employers and that have a good view on what is going on in their sector, in their economy, and so on. Definitely, they pinpointed to the fact that indeed labor shortages in Belgium are increasing and that, yes, maybe this could be an opportunity to try to attract international talents, from other continents. But I want also to maybe make the nuance there that indeed we had VOCA, Agoria, Euro chambers as part of our projects and with a strong will to be part of them. At the same time, these federations are not necessarily the employers, the hiring companies. They represent them, yes, and they are enthusiastic, and of course that's great. But then when talking to their members, the hiring companies and so on, that discussion for us was a bit more difficult, and it's still a bit more difficult. I think indeed when you are the one that is about to hire and looking for talents, you are of course looking at it from your own eyes, from the employer's perspective, listing the risks, listing the options that you have, and that's a different story, of course. So the difficulty for us has been indeed at the level also of the individual employers. And I think, yes, like it's been coming forward this morning, but also yesterday, it's important to have that voice on board as well, I think, in the whole setup of the partnership, in the choices that you make on the methods that you're going to use and so forth. We've definitely learned that indeed, it's good to have individual employers on board as well and to look at it also from their perspectives. So in Belgium, I think indeed, yes, we built this kind of broad partnership, and then through our local offices in African countries, for instance, we kind of mirrored those partnerships also on the other side, right? With again having the government on board, the employment players, public employment service, and also the private sector, obviously, on the other side. It's not always been easy. In some countries, it took us months, sometimes years, to bring it all together, to have everybody on board, to have everybody aligned, on what we actually wanted to do with this. But yeah, it's probably part of the investment when you go and pilot, these skills mobility partnerships. You need to build these, coalitions, if you will. You need to build these pathways, and hopefully by doing that, by mobilizing everyone around these ideas, you can, for future projects or future initiatives, tap into those things that now exist, to those players that now know each other, have worked with each other, and so forth. So the whole debate on sustainability, of course, is related also to the partnerships. So yeah, I think as a last word, maybe you have the actual implementing partners, as I would call them, that do the operational day-to-day work with us. But then around that, you have a lot of stakeholders, of course. You have in both Belgium and then the partner countries in Africa, a lot of stakeholders that also are interested in some of the aspects, around these elements. And it's important to have those on board as well, I think. And so throughout our projects, for instance, we typically do stakeholder meetings with broader audiences, a bit like today, if you wish, where we try, to explain what's going on. We try to indeed answer questions and so on and so on. So I think from the partnership perspective, that has been our experience so far.
All right, thank you. I heard the building of the coalitions, and I think it's something that was also actually kind of the basis of the idea what the EU Commission yesterday presented. But then to go to the partnership side on the end of the partner countries, I would like to ask Rafaela. So what are for Enabel the main building blocks and levies to construct partnerships with third countries?
Thank you very much, Chris, and really thank you very much for having Enabel not just here, but organizing this with the EMN. It's really, and the IOM, it's really a premiere, and it's so important because it means that coalition is really there, that partnership really has a meaning, at least in Belgium, and it's so nice to see all of you, but particularly some of you with whom we've been in partnership, building the reason why we are here together. So it's really a special thank. But it's also a bit of a provocation because one could really wonder what is a development agency doing on this stage? So what's the role for development actors? What does a development operator to do with employment, migration, training people in Belgium? What is Enabel's legitimacy in the room and on stage and organizing? So the heavier and heavier. Huh? And this is, for me, really the starting point. Camilla Hagström from DG INPA said it yesterday. If we want to have some bits of legitimacy when we talk with third countries about talent or whatever other partnership, a talent starts from interest on both sides. A partnership is not something I build at home and I come and present you or inform you about. A partnership, it's something that will build together, starting from mutual interest, which doesn't mean that the interest is exactly the same. It can very well be, and I will get here in a second, it can very well be that we have different visions, different missions, different goals, but there needs to be an intersection somewhere. There needs to be interests that match, and I quote Daphne, somewhere. And this area of common interest is there where a development actor like the Belgian Development Agency finds its legitimacy in the room, on the stage, and in the partnerships, because it really brings the view, but also the interaction with the variety of actors that compose the partnership at both ends. And in fact, we should stop talking about partnership and we should really go for partnerships, because we are talking about not just two blocks, two countries, origin and destination, but a variety of very different actors with very different visions, objectives, etc., whose interests need to match somewhere. Where do they match? Helen Dempster from the Global Development Center said yesterday, don't go to the employers, talk about development. Why should they even care about development of the country where the future employees would come from? It's none of their business. Yes, they can be concerned, social responsibility, but it's really not their primary concern. So this is a bit of a provocation, but it's just to say that finding that area of common interest is not that easy, and is exactly there where the challenge, but also the beauty of starting on an equal footing in the partnership. You have heard this in the video from Palim, different people saying, like people from the Moroccan employment agency saying, we were very happy to be in this partnership. We were very happy to train in Morocco people who will certainly also have the chance to go and work abroad, but also to work and serve labor market needs in our economy. We were very happy to be in a dialogue with the DAB, and I'm looking at Lenka now here, because we learn by working together. We learn how it is functioning in other economies, the role of employment agencies altogether. So we learn how to best communicate with different employment agencies if we want to find and reach that area of common interest. So I know I've been a bit long, but I conclude by saying, how do we build? We build by starting on an equal footing and looking together for those areas, I say always that area, but those areas of common interest, from migration-related authorities who have an interest in having channels of communication and exchange and common understanding between countries or among countries, if we open a bit the floor, employment actors, we just said, employers, who needs talents, but also who need relation with the areas where the talent come from, because that trust also helps building sound working relation and mutual understanding and functioning relation. People working at the community level, at local governance level, let's not forget, we always say it, but it's so important, when mobility happens, it's not a country to country, it's a territory to territory relation. So a lot of actors that need to find the sphere of interest that touch theirs. And this is where a development actors that really looks at this perspective can play its role and can support partnerships.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. But if I can conclude two things actually from what you both said, is actually the emphasis, and it's the name of the panel, but it's lessons learned. I hear that like the construction happens through experience, through piloting. You learn from the piloting and you bring it a little bit further. And you mentioned as well, so why are you on stage? Why is Rob on stage? We also, in the context of this event, we constructed a partnership. We had lessons learned. We went from one side to the other. That's also a construction of a partnership. So I'm very happy that we are here today on the stage. But then my next question is to Björn, and it's also about partnerships, but also about maybe scalability as well. So if we take the example of Germany, and more specifically the Triple Win project, we can see that Germany has tapped into a surplus of already trained talents in the third country for a specific sector. How is that organized? And do you think that this approach can be duplicated for all or for other sectors? And do you think that this can be inscribed in a more general partnership framework?
Thank you very much. Quite comprehensive question in this case, and also thank you very much for sharing and learning with you here, and for the invitation to be part of the panel. Yes, where should I start? I guess as Rafaela also ticked every box, trust, match of interest, I think I would build on that. Taking this replicable idea of Triple Win, I think what is the big difference if you take the Triple Win approach, where you have to, in a way, assess a constellation, the GSP can create a constellation in a way. And if I take the starting point of the Triple Win project was, of course, always the demand situation. the starting point is the demand, and what was mentioned before, of course, I think we as international organizations have to learn the employer language. We do that in several ends, but I think it's still something what we can improve, especially to translate it into exactly what you said, the match of interest in a way. No, it's not always the same what everybody wants from the other, but it's obviously possible to find a common interest in a way. And that's where we started, and it started with health, and I think it was around 2010, 12, where we started a mini pilot. And I remember with engineers, the employer said, we offered the opportunity to go for engineers, and they said, no, it's nice to know where we could collaborate, but there's not that huge pressure to walk forward. In the health sector, we started, and immediately the demand increased. So we said, oh, there's something in a way. And then, of course, it's the question, it is replicable, that's what I see, but of course, we have to identify the right constellation. We need a surplus, we need the common interest, and perhaps to transfer it to the partnership question, I would perhaps divide it into perhaps 3 levels. The one is, if I take the country of destination, in this case, Germany, I think what helped us a lot is this natural partnership between GIZ and the Federal Employment Service in Germany, that we had a 30 years collaboration, and this topic came up and say, hey, how can we perhaps match our interests and also our structures, having the structure in Germany, having the structure abroad as GIZ. So this was one part. The other part is, as we were in the partner countries, it was sometimes easy because we had a trustful collaboration with, for example, universities, TVET colleges, and of course, some administrational entities. So to build up trust on this idea and have an open dialogue, we would look for workforce. You have unemployed colleagues in this field. How can we match that? And of course, then the question to bring up this this bilateral agreement. What is the framework? But perhaps later on we will discuss that, because this is, in my opinion, of course, very important how you design the partnership. Perhaps I stop here.
All right. Thank you very much. And maybe this is also a good time to remind everybody that we launched a polling questions, and so they're related to the questions that are asked here today. So if you give your input to the polling questions, we're going to debate them afterwards. Also, maybe related to what Björn said, the Public Employment Service will be on the panel of this afternoon, so together with Rafaela. So this is also going to be very interesting. All right, Rob. So building labor mobility pathways, skills mobility pathways, requires the identification of national partners and third country partners. Additionally, it requires the identification of sectors in need. From the Belgian perspective, from your experience, do you think it's more viable to identify specific countries that have a labor surplus in specific sectors, or to create more open-ended channels where you target countries with a general labor surplus?
Excellent question, I would say, and the answer is not so straightforward, I think. Indeed, a bit like what Björn said, in Belgium, we have typically gone where the demand was. So we've talked first to the sectors, let's say, that are really in need of labor. And that has often been our starting point. You can then say, yes, but could you open it up to all sectors? Maybe yes, to some extent, but I'll come back to that. If you take that demand side and you say, okay, how can I mirror that with some other country, for instance, that has a surplus maybe in labor, specifically, fit for that sector that we have identified in Belgium, yeah, then you start working on, what are the possibilities there, right? And I think it's a bit also like what you said, Rafaela, it's not so straightforward, right? First of all, you need good data, because you have plenty of countries around, so, where do you start? It's a difficult question. But second, in building the partnership, yes, you need to have indeed some common ground also with this third country, right? There needs to be an interest on the other side as well. So there's different interests that need to be met. We've always or often received also from the hiring companies in Belgium, we often receive the question like, but why are you working with this country? Or it's often African countries. The match project is with Nigeria and Senegal. Why Nigeria and Senegal? Can we not hire someone from Latin America or from India? Or why is it so limited, right? It's a good question, From the employer's perspective, it's of course, wherever I find the right talent, I would be interested in hiring that person. So why do we focus on specific countries? Well, we focus because indeed we need to set up a partnership that involves everyone and that is indeed, that has a shared interest, let's say. At the same time, you cannot open it up easily to all countries or to multiple countries because that also duplicates costs, of course. IOM, we're typically an intermediary organization. Of course, we have offices in these countries that we work with, but if you would go and open it up, for instance, to 10 countries, then you would have indeed 10 IOM offices involved, and that, of course, duplicates immediately the costs related to all of this. So it's a matter of indeed, finding the right balance there. We typically, in the countries of origin, we would of course go into, which are the ones that are willing to work with us, and do they actually have a surplus? Often we're talking about youth, younger people. Often we take the indicator, youth unemployment rate as a starting point, where we say, could we provide, possibilities to these youngsters, and a lot of these youngsters are very talented. So it's also youth with degrees and so forth that often do not have a job in their country of origin. Is there a possibility there to set up something that is mutually beneficial, right? Take the case of the Tunisia project. Yes, we had a whole batch of youngsters that had no job. We invited them to come and do internships in Belgian companies. And thanks to that international experience, they had, the possibility indeed to access companies, jobs, and so forth in Tunisia and possibly, in other countries as well. So it's a matter of indeed combining what you have in terms of demand with what you can find on the other side in terms of supply. It sounds easy, but in reality, there's plenty of other parameters that come into the game, I think. And we've also touched upon some of those. The political one is, of course, an important one as well, right? Our states have agendas as well, and those often, those are agendas that we often need to take into account as well. Countries have relationships with other countries. Countries have interest, in suggesting options to other countries, and that is something that comes into this game as well, and it is a bit beyond what IOM sometimes would put forward. So yes, I think indeed there's different elements. It's complex. We would tend to start from data, labor market data. At the same time, I think one of the lessons that we've seen is, and that especially with the projects that are funded by the EU here, like the Match project, is that indeed it would be interesting to have also a stronger involvement, for instance, from DG INPA in the African side, right? With also, possibilities to invest more there in the building of the capacity of the partners and so on and so on. So there's been also limitations from a budgetary point of view for what concerns our projects in that respect.
All right, thank you. I pass the floor to Rafaela with the next question. So you adopt the global skills partnership approach, which was very extensively discussed yesterday and very well defined by Helen. If you compare it with the triple win approach, the GSP approach is possible when the same labor market needs exist at both ends. So based on your experience, what are the main challenges in implementing this specific approach, and what are the main takeaways?
Thank you. And although it has been extensively discussed, just briefly, 2 sentences to reframe it if in the room or online there is someone who was not here with us yesterday. What is the main idea? And Helen, pardon me, I will try to be as precise as possible. What are the main features of this idea of global skills partnership? Indeed, if we take what Rob said, so the starting point is, or one of the starting point can be youth unemployment or unemployment altogether, so lack of opportunities for talent. This can depend, bien sûr, on a lack of need in the local labor market because there are a lot of people who are trained, for instance, as Java developers. But it can also mean that there are other kind of mismatches and people who are trained but maybe not perfectly fit with the need of the labor market at home are not finding their ways to the labor market. So this is the idea, and this is what we have built together in partnership, for instance, with Morocco or with Tunisia. Looking at needs at both ends, so we are really in partnership. We are together looking at sectors and areas and professions that are really in need. We know that care sector is in need. We know that construction sector is in need. We know that the ICT sector is in need. We know that the green transition, green job sectors are in need at both ends. And therefore, we really work together in the common interest area with the different actors from the private, from the intermediaries, from the public sector, in order to design training programs that are carried out at origin. Therefore, for instance, the youngsters you have seen in the video, they have been trained specifically on Java development in Morocco, because by training them, we do, as Ellen was saying yesterday, we do support the system itself, the training system itself, the training to employment system itself. We create a pool of talents, Java developers, that can serve both the local labor market. You have heard employers and employment agency representatives from Morocco saying, we're very happy because we were in need for this. Indeed, there were talents that were trained, and you have heard this, that were trained in ICT or trained in mathematics or in something else, but they were not really fit for what we were in need of. And now these talents, they are available both for the labor market at origin and for the labor market at end. And I keep looking at Lenka, our colleagues from VDAB. Why is it so? Because this training curriculum that is so well received by the employers and the representative from the Moroccan Employment Agency was designed in cooperation with VDAB, was designed in cooperation between the actors that will then support the employment of those talents in both markets. What I'm telling you here is that what we've described before as matching interests, etc., is really a complex matrix, but it's a matrix that first puts individuals at the core, at the center, so giving more opportunities to individuals, but also that puts the need of the private sector and of the systems at the core. Reinforcing systems is the core of any partnership. It is convenient to me, but it is also convenient to you. And even if we look at different things, even if we compete in a way, there are areas where we mutually reinforce each other. So there is where I answer you, it is a challenge. You can bet it is a challenge. My ears were brown when we started Palim, and now you can see me, and it is not COVID. It's Palim and Tam. But is it worthwhile? Indeed it is. Because yes, we need to scale up. Yes, there is an issue around ownership and making sure that things are sufficiently grounded and sound, and that we can let go and they can be scaled by the protagonists, by the main characters. But there is an enormous need to keep testing the way we design partnership. We look for the interest of migration actors, employment and training operators, and intermediaries. We have not spoken yet or enough about representative of workers, trade unions, associations, individuals. Of course it is a challenge, but exactly as you said before, we will only overcome some of the challenges and face new challenges if we keep walking. And the only way to keep walking, as it has been said yesterday as well, from different angles and perspective, is to embrace the concepts and to test and to pilot and to build, and also to show employers the value, to show communities the value of being in these partnerships.
Great, that was very clear, thank you. All right, so I hear testing. Yesterday I heard employers, employers, and employers. Today I hear testing, testing, and testing, and building, building, and building. So, Björn, in the Triple Win projects, GIZ supports the process with its international field structures. I think we heard that also a lot today. So focusing on the promotion of the nurses' German language skills, their professional preparation for the placement, and the encouragement of their integration after they arrive in Germany. So if we talk about ownership, we talk about employers, what is the role of the private sector in the mobility framework? Are there options for transfer of this approach to a pure GSP?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the employers, of course, appear several times in the Triple Win approach. The first is, of course, in the design. For example, we took employers to the places to get in touch with institutions, to get a feeling about the workers' background, the country's background. So that's, I think, very important. And of course, they are also appearing in this field of integration, the post-arrival situation that we would try also to prepare, not only to how to integrate into the working structure, also the setup in a village or is it a big city, and what kind of situation you have there, and of course as the financing section. No, they pay it in this case. What we do as GIZ, we have this division of work, where of course the Federal Employment Agency is selecting the candidates and of course is placing them. That's their origin of duty, if you want. And we try exactly what you described, to build up the infrastructure, that they are qualified and prepared, and the employers are prepared too. I think the big topic you raised also, how to get from the pilot situation to a replicable, sustainable, financial sustainable way. Of course, if you design together and you do it in a scope of we have a funding for that, it's easier to work together at the first time. But a day, this discussion will come. So I think it's very good to put that also at the beginning. There will be a cost sharing because it does not come from the sky in a way. And this is really interesting that I think it's feasible to discuss that. No? And then we found a way in this case of the Triple Win project that it's now, I think, clear that it's financed by the private sector. To transfer it to the GSP, I would always say, if we perhaps take 3 cost fields, if you want. The development, which is very expensive, because exactly there is a lot of trust building, constellation assessment, and of course finding the right professions. I think what is also very important in my point of view, that we have to have this kind of semi-perfect solutions at the first step. And I think it was already mentioned by Süßmuth and Annan. They said, hey, you can't start migration with a perfect fit. You have to jump into it in a way, a kind of startup mindset in a way. And I think that's very important also in the GSP, that you have some space to create. And then, of course, we have to discuss how the division of costs. We have some structural costs and we have some individual costs, and how this could be divided. But I think there is a cost-sharing mechanism where the private sector can play a bigger role to make things sustainable, but I see also to make a model rolling. Public investments are very important to initiate an idea. That's the idea of a pilot, no? I think perhaps, yeah, I stop here.
Thank you. I hear testing again.
Of course.
So if we then think about the private sector again, we heard about this cost-sharing idea, about the Triple Win, which has a very big financial input from the private sector. So from the Belgian experience, where do you think that the key lies to make them more attractive to employers and scalable for the private sector?
The skills mobility partnerships,
Yes.
you mean? Yeah, no, it's a good question. I made a list here of actually points that we received in the feedback also from the companies that we're working with. And indeed, the attractiveness of the schemes as such is still, something that you can talk about. How attractive is it actually for the private sector? One of the things that comes forward immediately is, of course, the hiring company makes a kind of risk assessment, right? They have a number of questions and they look at, what are the risks, what are the costs for me, to step in, what could potentially be the benefits, right? And there's actually quite a long list of risks, if you look at it from their perspective. So the framework is set up in a way that indeed, for instance, if you say, I want to hire a talent from elsewhere, I need to submit a request for a single permit that comes with conditions in terms of salary, in terms of contracting, and so forth. So a lot of these companies, they are like, yes, okay, but we don't know these countries. We don't know these talents. We don't know their diploma. We don't know how it would fit within our teams here, right? And on the other side, there's a lot of costs. We need to pay these people immediately, day one, a salary that is equivalent to what someone from Belgium would receive, right? We have costs of recruitment. So those are non-neglectable costs, right? But you have all the costs of the mobility, the relocation. All of these costs, are listed to their list. And then they say, well, it's a lot of costs, it's a lot of risks, and, there's no really guarantee of success, right? So it's a complicated discussion, obviously. One of the things I think that we need to keep in mind to make the schemes attractive to the private sector is, of course, the quality of the talents, right? So you need to, that's key for the private sector. The CVs that you bring to them, they need to be really interesting, right? Otherwise, it stops there and there is no follow-up. And that brings us back to the partnerships, because the partnerships in the countries of origin, indeed, how are we going to make sure that we identify the right talents to match the expectations on the European side? So the quality of the talents, I think, is an important one. We've heavily invested in the system to identify the right talents in sometimes huge countries. Take Nigeria, it's hundreds of millions of inhabitants. Where do you find these people, right? How do you attract them, and so on? So we've really tried to, together with VDAB also, to try to have a good pre-selection process, so that what comes out of there is actually really interesting for the private sector. I think that's an obvious starting point. It doesn't necessarily mean that it works for all cases. You have indeed, we're working with a lot of companies that are in recruitment processes with us. A lot of them don't end up hiring these people. So there's still questions there, on how come, right? A question indeed that I already mentioned is, why do we limit it to some countries? Why can we not have a broader spectrum? We hear a lot these days, you can stop the process of hiring, from Africa. I just found a Ukrainian talent, right? I'm going to hire the Ukrainian talent. So, of course, these are things that happen. This is the situation in which we are today. And then you can indeed ask, why the Ukrainian talent, and why are you no longer interested, in a potential talent, from an African country? So, important questions. I think, indeed, involving professionals. I see that, indeed, some of the people that we work with, also from the private sector, HR professionals, is key to make that happen, to connect those dots. We've seen also that these talent partnerships, they can indeed also generate an interest for Africa as a continent. We have a lot of companies with whom we work that actually in the back of their mind are willing to explore also the African market. Some of them have a project, some of them, are selling products in Africa, some of them are thinking maybe I should open an office. So that's typically, I think, a hook where you can say that's a good starting point, right? You can discover also Africa by engaging with us, by going into these labor markets and seeing, what's going on there. In the project with Tunisia, we had these Belgian companies that were hosting these young Tunisian talents. Eventually, 4 of these companies opened an office in Tunis, right, and are actually hiring these talents back in Tunis. This was completely unexpected. When we were talking to these companies, eventually, at the start, they were like, wait, no, I mean, why would we hire young Tunisians, right? I mean, we could find other people for interns, right? So we had really to convince them, we had really to bring them on board. But then indeed, some of them were very happy with the experience and they realized like, yeah, okay, you know, these people are available, right? These people have skills. We didn't realize. It's the same language, French for Belgium. It's the same time zone. It's only 3.5 hours flight. And then, you know, indeed, you have no candidates for certain profiles in Belgium, but you have plenty on the Tunisian side. So, and they are also, in terms of cost, of course, attractive. The average salaries are way lower. So all of that made that thanks to such an exchange, thanks to such a talent partnership, you indeed had companies that, you know, developed an interest in Africa as well. And I think that that is, again, could potentially be also mutually beneficial to say, well, you know, it's not only about your needs in terms of staffing, it's about opening up your scope also, you know, in terms of company, in terms of operations, and so on. So I think that this interest for Africa and the African market, I should say, because it's also very underestimated. You have plenty of countries where indeed you have a middle class, a market that is developing. Take Nigeria, take Lagos, for instance, the African tech hub. So many things are ongoing there. So I think making those links and bringing that into the discussions is obviously important as well. What's the perspective of, for instance, the procedures? A lot of companies, they complain, well, you know, the procedures, we need to apply for a permit, it takes so long, then we need this diploma to be recognized, that takes another few weeks, and so on and so on. You know, I actually need someone next week, right? And you're telling me that the earliest in 6 months, you know, there will be someone here for me. So that's obviously a thing that comes forward as well. It's for them also, you know, a risk, right? For them, it's kind of a long-term engagement. You know, should I actually go there and invest in that for something that might be coming, you know, in X months? So yeah, it's a message, I think, to the authorities altogether is if we can get those procedures faster, simpler, I think that would be a real benefit for the talent partnerships altogether. Last point maybe indeed is that we see, especially I would say maybe with smaller companies, SMEs, that us providing some kind of assistance in also onboarding these talents could also be, I think, an interesting element for companies that are willing to try indeed to hire more internationally, right? So what does that mean? A lot of smaller companies have not that much experience with hiring from outside the EU, right? And they fear a bit, you know, how is that going to work and how is that match going to happen and so forth. So us providing, you know, preparation, training on, you know, how do you bring in someone, you know, from another culture, from another continent? What are the do's, what are the don'ts? You know, sit with them and go through it together. I think that can definitely also have a positive impact, you know, on the interest that you generate from the private sector. Yeah, maybe one last point is, and it's obvious, I think, but it's indeed showcasing success stories. I think that's really critical. It's a bit also what you said, you know, you need to be able to show, you know, what this could mean for companies. And so it shouldn't be too abstract, you know, the whole concept of talent partnerships. I think it's better to showcase companies, individuals, they've done it, it's been a success. If you bring those testimonies to the employers, I think automatically you generate more interest.
Thank you for that very clear answer. Again, I heard testing for, in this case, the quality, to showcase the quality of the talents that you bring in. So if we test, if we have these success stories, that can be a way to scale up. On the other hand, I also want to make the link with this afternoon because I heard Lenka was mentioned several times. So she's going to have the occasion to reply to what was said. And on the specific, on the onboarding assistance, we also have International House Leuven this afternoon, who have a lot of experience in a small town, in a small region, with onboarding the talents, and so also the local governments can play a role in this onboarding. But while Rob was very passionately giving his discourse, the numbers on my screen turned red. And so I want to encourage you to fill in the poll so we can discuss it later. It's going to be in around 9 to 10 minutes that we're going to put it on the screen. You have the QR codes. They're supposed to be in the agenda. For the people online, it's, I think, in the chat. So fill them in so that we can discuss them later. And it's your opportunity to also get involved in this very passionate debate. So thank you, Rob. Now I pass on to Rafaela again. So with the presentation of the EU Skills and Talent Package, which was also discussed yesterday, we see that the Commission tends to rely on member state experiences to further the role of these talent partnerships. So what do you think is missing at the EU level, talking from your own experience, to make these partnerships a more scalable and sustainable labor avenue?
Very difficult question, specifically after the panel we had yesterday. I will get to that, but I take advantage of the fact that I have a mic. And I just wanted to complement in 2 words, and being very cautious and careful about the timing, what Rob was saying. We've said and repeated the issue of trust, and specifically looking at the private sector. Yesterday we've heard employers, and yet you don't have any employer on stage now, so you can think, but did they really get the message? Yes, we got the message. And in fact, one of the things that maybe with Jamila representing the Flemish administration we will discuss this afternoon is that certainly the issue of trust and the issue of showing what works, but also making people known, making context and work culture known is very important. And therefore, having possibility to have mobility, even beyond the strictly speaking employment opportunity, and making sure that, for instance, Belgian employers get to know the advantages of being in a relation of some kind with actors in third countries is extremely important. Yesterday, the representative from the cabinet of the Secretary of State mentioned a series of projects, and among those he mentioned PEM-WECHO, which is a project linking Belgium and Senegal in a rather circular way, where through business visa, we give the opportunity to Belgian entrepreneurs and young, talented Senegalese to get to know each other and explore avenues for partnerships, for businesses, for getting to know the environment one the other. So I think that what we are doing here in testing, and looking for creating this space of confidence, of trust, of design that is based on is not falling on sky. It also depends on your willingness to invest, you being the private sector this moment. This also can be done through complementary pathways, I would say, complementary ways that really help creating this ecosystem whereby it's not just it's very heavy to hire someone at a very high salary scale, and I feel a bit concerned by the consequences, etc., but let's, in this building of partnership, in this building of an ecosystem where each one finds its interest and its need filled, let's also think of the entire ecosystems and ways that really help lowering barriers, lowering fears, etc. And this also replies to your question, because something that is missing is a comprehensive view, an holistic view, an open view that goes beyond the immediate political interest, the immediate institutional interest, the immediate economic interest. If we want this to work, we have said it yesterday very loudly, and we will repeat this today, it is an ecosystem we are working in, and it's a complex one that touches upon very many different policy areas, because we go from migration to employment to training to development. It's a very complex ecosystem. So you cannot play like, I want to get there and I will go there no matter what. We have to get there together, and it is maybe no matter what, but it's certainly not no matter how. So the how is also exploring the bits and pieces that compose this ecosystem and potentialize where we see opportunities.
Thank you for that.
And I kept the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it also reflects very well what you said on what we saw yesterday in the discussion, in the presentation. It's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. All right. Björn, if you hear these testimonies from your Belgian colleagues, how is your experience different in the structure of the projects, or more generally, if you want to take something away of this discussion today?
Of course, I think it sounds very familiar to me to how to build ecosystems in a way, and how to assess the situation, where to start with, and to get all on board in a way. Where I guess, I think these red colors probably are pushing me, so I try to be brief. Perhaps I think the setup of the Triple Win project could be also used more or less for the GSP, and of course for the talent partnership as an idea, because we have the bilateral framework where the partner country and the German Federal Employment Agency agree to a certain design of working together in a way. And then, of course, it's very important that the partnership is in a way designed in a way where you have a joint partnership discussions, joint committees. That's what I think every project has. And there is also the opportunity important to say, we monitor what we do, we take the learnings out of it, we see a regular exchange as necessary, and of course we have also the opportunity to stop something. For example, Triple Win was stopped with Serbia. Serbia said, no, we stop this, and that's important that it's possible to stop something if you see, hey, it's not the interest of both sides anymore in a way. And the other thing is, of course, that this division of work is very clear, and in this case, I think it's interesting that in our partnership with the Federal Employment Agency, it's clear that they are the ones who select and hire and match, and of course they work on the permission, the work permission and all these topics, and we are more or less working on the infrastructure around. But that's of course the workers' approach. I think if you take the GSP model, it's of course another way, and there perhaps, I don't know if you have still time to touch this. If you just give me additional 1 minute, perhaps. I would perhaps just name in terms how to replicate this partnership in a broader way. I think not only taking the German case, I think it's really interesting what we discussed, the match of interest. If we see we have certain professions where we know in the future we need workforce internationally, so that's a kind of increase of the worldwide workforce in hospitality, in construction and in health. I think that's obvious. So I think it would be interesting if we see that the market in Europe at all is really, we are shrinking and we are looking for workforce. What is the model the EU offers worldwide? We have very complex languages in this region, and not everybody understands how recognition works in each country. So it would be really interesting to think, can we find an approach, a face to the partner, how we could rearrange these interests. Of course, language is a topic in operational terms and recognition, but to offer a fair model, because that's interesting. If we would have here an employer, then I think it's also very interesting to have the line, what is sustainable in the context of migration? What means sustainable? Is it the fairness? Is it the regular way? Is it the equal payment. I think it's a mix of it in a way, and that will be really interesting to find. Is fairness the new model of migration, and that's perhaps also the face to the world? I think it's more a question mark I put here.
All right, and we are right on time, I would say. I have 30 seconds over time. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned before, I think the debate of this afternoon, actually, like a lot of things that I heard, administrative, the pillars that we showed, they're going to be discussed this afternoon. We have the Flemish administration, we have the public employment services, we have International House Leuven, who is going to tell us about onboarding. We have Rafaela, who is going to make it hot under their feet. But so what I hear, or what I take away from what I heard today, or like for me that I found very interesting, is the fact that like the time is now to test that these things, these like labor shortages, they're going to be there. These partnerships take time to build. So the time is now. Now we start building them. Now we start testing them for in the future to have a flexible way of managing these shortages, these migration, these development goals. So in the meanwhile, I don't know if we have the, okay, somebody puts his thumbs up, so we have the polling results ready. If we can see them on the screen somewhere. All right, there we go. All right, so the first question that was asked in the polling was, according to you, which are the biggest benefits or interests for countries of origin participating in skills mobility partnerships? The number one outcome, so we asked to rank the questions in order of importance, was to reduce the high unemployment pressure at origin by giving opportunities to talents abroad while ensuring they keep a close link with their country of origin. Rob, is that a surprising outcome?
I would say no. I think indeed it makes sense. High unemployment pressure in the country of origin, I think indeed that's one of the key reasons why indeed you would set up talent partnerships. Again, it's linking the supply in this case with what we could offer in terms of demand or jobs. Keeping the link with the country of origin, I find that a very interesting one. It makes me think also about the fact that indeed in all of these talent partnerships there's probably a role also to play, for instance, with the diaspora communities. We have in Belgium in particular quite some diaspora communities, well represented, well organized in a lot of cases. So it's interesting also to think about it from that perspective. A lot of these diaspora members, second, third generation and so on, they are still, very attached to their country of origin. A lot of them are sending money back. A lot of them have projects running with their country of origin or have projects in the pipeline and so on. So it's interesting to connect that as well, I think, to the whole, skills mobility partnerships. What could be the link with the diaspora? How do you connect these people that would come, through skills mobility partnerships from African countries with what is already going on here in the communities and so on? So that's definitely something we look into as well within our projects.
All right, thank you. I know that ICMPD is here today. I know they also very much focus on diaspora. And I know personally that for Rafaela, it's also a very important topic. But if I can ask you, because I find it quite interesting to see that the least, because we talked about institutional capacity, and actually it was the last one. So building internal institutional capacity by benefiting from knowledge transfers from Europe was considered the least important benefit for countries of origin. So you both talked about it, Björn and Rafaela, so I'll let you comment on.
First, I think that we should complement the answer because the benefit is mutual. The benefit is really mutual. It's not just institutions from third countries that learn from institutions from Europe, but it is looking at the advantages for both parties to better understand how both parties work. So I still keep a hope that if we had added the mutual benefit, this would have been ranked a bit higher. But jokes apart, the 5 answers are important and very much complementary. And the 5 answers really point at aspects that yesterday and today have been mentioned several times. So I can totally understand that, as said before, when we think of talent partnership, we immediately think of anything that is related to job opportunities and to making job opportunities happen. So the institutional capacity building doesn't come to mind as the first and most important element. Yet, it was important to put it there, and it is important that we keep in mind that we are really building or shaping, in a sense, the ecosystem, and institutions are an important part. I'm not just thinking of the central level. I am thinking a lot of the local level that is mobilized, because mobility always happen on territories, and therefore those that are in the front line are really called to have specific tools. You have talked about onboarding. For instance, in Belgian regions, you have agencies that are public agencies that really take care of some part of the social, cultural onboarding of individuals that arrive. And I am talking as a foreigner in Belgium. I did attend, and my colleague will laugh because I'm very proud, I did attend the Huis van the Netherlands courses for integration and language, and it was important to me. And I always say that if my kids had access to social and health services in their first years of age, it's because I attended that course and I knew that I had to go to the ONU. So, of course, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, but it is very important that we keep very clear in our mind that this mutual understanding of how the systems work and how the institutions work really make the partnership easier. We will talk more this afternoon, I'm sure, but really make the partnership easier because, for instance, employment agencies at both ends prepare much better the candidates if they are aware of the rules and non-written rules of the ecosystems. So capacity building also is done, capacity development and building, it is done through cooperation and through partnerships.
Perhaps just a short remark. I always thought that they are very complex, the questions and the answers as well. But as I see it now, I think even it would be perhaps another design if we would ask by target group. Because, of course, on the individual level, of course, number one is number one. There the things happen. But if I talk about the institutional capacity question, and I would ask, for example, now in our GSP in nursing with the Philippines, now with the universities, I think they would knock on 5 now, because they see after 1.5 years implementing in COVID situation, everybody knows it's very funny to work with migration in COVID situation, that it was really interesting that now the hypothesis that geriatrics is very interesting for a now young population, but getting older, that technology is interesting, but now as we are implementing, this topic is raising because you see, hey, there is a transfer, there is really not a kind of transfer, it's really an exchange on topics in a way, which is starting, and interesting to see that this topic is, of course, a very specific GSP topic, I would say, because this will increase a lot. And it's also a kind of precondition for an infrastructure, for an ecosystem. So, of course, it's not the lowest hanging fruit, unfortunately.
All right, thank you. Maybe, so personally, I find it very interesting to that the second answer is also connecting the labor markets to foreign labor markets through establishing structural partnerships, because that's what we very much discussed today. And I think Rafaela really emphasized the partnership, and this is a way of establishing the partnership. But given that we have 6 questions and limited time, maybe we can already go to the second one.
No, we can't.
Yeah.
Let's stay with the first.
Yeah, apparently it's too. Yeah, it's a survey poll, so probably there is a technical problem. But you can also put it on the screen. Oh, okay, very good. So the second one is, according to you, what are the key factors that set the basis for building a skills partnership? And the number 1 answer was the institutional interest to have legal pathways for labor migration. So maybe Rafaela, you can comment on that one. Why is that the first one, or?
Oh, it's very interesting because in a way it's contradictory with what we have just seen. So it proves that in fact all of the answers, depending on the target group or on the angle from which we look at them. So I think it is encouraging on the one hand to know that an important part of this ecosystem are migration actors. So those who are really in charge of making sure that the institutional and legal frameworks and arrangements are there for mobility to happen and labor mobility to happen. And this is very important. We have heard of it yesterday. It was very nice to have the colleagues from the Parliament, Cecilia Navarra, and the colleagues pointing and asking from the floor the question. We see here DG Home and DG INTPA, but what about DG Employment? What about DG Growth? So the ecosystem is much more complex than migration actors and development actors, and we have said it, and it is clear. But it is extremely important that framework exists for mobility to happen. And I think that we have a colleague from Spain in the audience here, Gladys Roy from the institution dealing with migration in Spain, and we were exactly discussing this point yesterday during the coffee break. It is wonderful to talk about talent partnership, but what if the legal framework is not there for this to happen? So I am very glad that this is number 1, because although the ecosystem is much more complex and it is not a no matter how, it is very important that the whole ecosystem, that the employers, the individuals, the trade unions, etc., the legal framework need to be there.
Great. Rob, maybe you can follow up on that. And also I would like you to comment on number 5, the need of the private sector to move talents across the borders.
Yeah, I think indeed the institutional setup is key. So as we already said earlier this morning, indeed you need the coalition of the willing, and within those institutions, within those coalitions, you have the institutions that play a key role. And it's indeed about establishing a legal pathway that can be sustained, right? That should in the end eventually not be dependent of a project, right? Once you have the partnership established, the two countries getting to know each other with their institutions, employment services, and so forth, you could imagine in the long run that the intermediaries, such as Enabel and IOM, would scale down, right? And that these things could start happening without, let's be honest, costly intermediaries, right? So I think indeed the institutional setup is key, and it's key also that they reflect with us on how this can evolve into becoming more successful as well, these partnerships. You have still within the frameworks in countries like Belgium, issues, that make it very, very difficult to implement these partnerships. I think the representative of the State Secretary yesterday touched upon some of these things. You mentioned language in Belgium is also an important issue. Yeah, a lot of these youngsters, they will go through additional complementary training, right, if they would be selected for jobs. But that means indeed that you cannot move from one day to the other into a job, and especially in, for instance, the health sector. So yes, you have then indeed a period of complementary training, But what do you need to do then from an institutional point of view? Go for a work permit, a single permit, or go for a student visa first, right? And how would that work, right? And how do you convince the employer that he needs to be part of that cycle? It's a complex institutional setup, so I think that having the relevant institutions on board and having them reflect with us on how to adapt the legal frameworks, I think is definitely a good idea. You wanted me to reflect on
the last, the need of the private sector to move talents across borders. So
yes,
that's considered the least important, and actually by quite the margin, I would say.
Yeah, to move talents across borders, yeah, I think there is indeed a growing internationalization of the economies, in all continents. So you typically see that there is indeed quite some mobility going on. And the question really is, yes, how can you organize that, so that it can actually take place? Sometimes it's a matter of bringing in people to headquarters to train them, to onboard them, and so forth, and then to post them in some office elsewhere, or sometimes on another continent. It's a vast, area. I think important to the private sector. But yeah, I think it links well to the other points that are listed above.
All right, thank you, Björn.
I think I have nothing to add. No, I agree completely, yeah.
All right, great. And I would propose we go to the third question. I'm looking at the, all right, interactive discussion, yes. 2 seconds, I heard. In any case, I think what we already heard today, I saw Tesseltje de Lang, who is going to be the moderator of this afternoon, taking good note for these comments to feed into the discussion of this afternoon. And in the meanwhile, we have the third question coming up. So according to you, what are the most important necessary ingredients to build SMPs equally beneficial to sending and destination countries? There, the employer, so ensure that the employers invest into the human capital of the foreign talents. Hope?
Absolutely key, indeed, whether it's for temporary job placements, whether it's for internships, whether it's for longer term, cooperation. Eventually, it's all about indeed investing in this human capital. And it's this human capital that indeed will contribute or to the economies in the countries of destination or to the economy in the countries of origin. Or elsewhere, yes, indeed, because that you see as well, the world is not as rigid anymore as we sometimes believe. I take the example of Nigerian talents that are invited by a company to come and work in Belgium. They look at you, they say, Belgium, maybe not, maybe I'm more interested in Silicon Valley, Australia, or any other possibility that I have. So, yeah, the world is evolving, and I think indeed people with skills that are in demand, they have multiple options, and so it's not so limited.
It's the race for talent.
The race for talent, indeed.
Rafaela, do you find...
I was thinking along the lines of Rob, and we have touched upon yesterday very briefly, but there is, well, briefly, although it is a very crucial topic, the one of not just investing and making sure that talents respond and correspond to the need of the more and more volatile labor market, and therefore timeliness and fitting for purpose are all issues that we have heard a lot in the discussions with employers, although they are not sitting here. Discussions are indeed going on with employers because it is important that they themselves invest and that they themselves are involved and very vocal in the discussion and in the designs of the skills partnership since the very beginning. We have heard it yesterday from OECD, but this is a reality already. Private sector and the representative of private sector associations, federations they are indeed partners of the IOM, of Enabel, of GIZ, and many other colleagues and organizations. Yet there is an issue around the skills. There is an issue around not just the recognition of a piece of paper, but a recognition of a savoir-faire, a recognition of how you deploy that skill, a recognition of skills that are not qualifiable, that are not directly linked to a diploma, and that yet are so crucial in some segments of the labor market. So yes, we have heard of the tool that the Commission is working on, of the talent pool, which will certainly help us reflect on how to do so, how to have a common language around skills and therefore around human capital, because we are revolving around that. And I am thinking of last week or 10 days back, when we have had the first big meeting on migration after so long in New York, at the review of the Global Compact, and a series of side events were organized. And in one of those, there was someone from El Salvador, presenting a tool that has been developed completely autonomously by trade unions, employment services, so no third organization involved, whereby they really tried to categorize those skills that are not immediately recognizable through diplomas. And it was very interesting, very specific to a sector, but yet I think that there we need to put some coalition building and common thought, because whatever tool, talent pool, or whatever other pool or repository, if it is only based on, okay, those who have this kind of diploma, they go in this box, this other kind of, we will not advance much. We will not serve much the interest of the private sector, the interest of the talents that want to be placed, the interest of the intermediaries from the public or from the private that connect the dots. So I think that when we say investing in human capital, I still miss something. What does it mean, and how do we do in order to make sure that we are talking, maybe not necessarily talking about the same thing, but talking the same language and making it possible to understand each other?
That's very interesting. May I take that up? Because I think that's very interesting, this first point, because it also shows the tension in between the model and the reality in a way, no? Because that's what we see, that's key for the GSP. But if I take a medium-sized employer in construction, I think the human resource development policy for 20 people is more or less, let's see, do we have enough for the next 6 months? And then, okay, now I invest in somebody who probably comes in 4 years with 100% recognition and good language skills. It's nice to have, but it's not the need in a way, of course. Also, you say, hey, in 5 years, there's nobody to hire anymore. Sorry. So that's, I think, the big tension, and I think this first question shows it. We need that, and so that's more or less the conclusion is we have to build it in a way. So because nobody will run alone, and also we see that I think the infrastructure can of course be built together, because an investment has to be there, but who is perhaps the coalition of the starting, or the herd will follow. But you have to have pioneers, and I think this is perhaps the chance we have to get the pioneers, and also bigger companies who have those resources to go for a bigger step, and involve also smaller companies. I just like also to put short light on the fifth question, because I think, or answer, the private sector in the destination countries, and that's really interesting that I myself, with the experience abroad, also saw that associations, for example, in construction or hospitality, I take Ethiopia because there I have some experience, they know it would be a big support, because they are interested in international standards. They see if this profession could be labeled with migration, that it's of course attractive, so that not everybody goes for an academic career. Perhaps even TVET professions could be more interesting and more attractive because you go for higher standards. And of course, what comes into play is the practical work, because that's where I think we have big differences. The recognition was named, how the design of the standards of work are to be designed, that we can have a kind of two-track approach where everybody gets the recognition of skills. So just to name that.
Thank you. I am surprised you didn't go for the second one, you went for the fifth one. But maybe while they put up the next question, it could be nice to have somebody from the audience to comment on or to ask a question related to what the panelists just said. I think there is a microphone somewhere, so if somebody wants to comment or has a question on one of the questions that were asked before. No hands in the room? No? All right, then we could maybe ask the Public Employment Service, the VDAB, what they thought about why they were second ranked in the polling question.
Popularity poll.
A popularity poll.
Yes. Is it on? It's
yes.
on. Yes, my name is Ellen Albrechts. I work for the Public Employment Service. You referred a few times to Lenka. I'm her colleague and I'm at the more operational part. So I'm following and setting up the projects. Yeah, I note down some, it's a general, it's not on one question, but a general remark. I completely understand the idea of the mutual benefits and the investment from all partners. But what is hard for VDAB as a public employment service, that we also need to get the results. And it's been a big investment as well, the PALIM project as the Match project. And it's also, we have a lot of lessons learned, and it was an intense pathway, so we learned a lot of things. We got some good ideas also to set up next projects, but the results are still missing. And I heard, I don't know who said it, but also the testimonies would be interesting to convince employers and to convince the different partners as well from the private as the public sector, but the testimonies are still missing. And so we are really hoping for quick results on the actual mobility. So I think it's time to take the next steps and take all the lessons learned with us to now get into concrete action. And the focus of the Public Employment Service is the filling in of the vacancies, the actual vacancies of the most severe bottlenecks in Flanders. So it's a general remark, but
thank you.
And not to be pessimistic. It's we have a lot of lessons we take with us, and we had nice contacts, nice partnerships together with IOM and Enabel. So we started, but now we get. We feel the pressure to get more concrete.
Before getting ahead of myself, in the afternoon we're going to have an IOM video of an employer.
Testimony,
yeah. Telling why it was important for him to be involved in a project. But
at the same time, I fully agree. And I just wanted to add as well that when you talk to hiring companies, their first question is often, has it been done? Who has done it? And can I talk to these people, right? So the results, they are absolutely key. I agree, and it's important to have those results to show tangibly what it means for companies, for talents, for countries involved, and so on. So we're definitely working hard on this. And again, we have had a lot of difficulties, COVID, Ukraine, and so forth, but that should not be excuses, I think. I think you need to showcase that all of these investments will now materialize into, what we're looking for, meaning indeed matching talents with jobs. At the same time, I have the feeling indeed that we've been exploring, testing, learning a lot of things, and that is very valuable as well. And so I would also invite all of us indeed to reflect on what should then the next model look like. And let's put the results first and see, have we reached results, where have we reached those, and how can we use those elements to build the next model so that we kind of make sure that we're doing the right thing, not making the mistakes from the past, and building on the things that where we feel that this has worked and that could lead to better results in a next round of projects potentially.
Maybe Björn, also I remember that you mentioned before, I wrote it down because I found it, you talked about the natural collaboration between the Public Employment Service and GIZ, so maybe you have a comment on this? Or?
No, of course, I think I like that question, also that remark you made, because I think at the beginning when we started, of course, it was with the Triple Win project now. It was also that learning the language and of course always having on the screen 250,000 nurses are missing and we come with 20. So this, okay. And then the step was exactly how to replicate, how to get trust, and what we did, because if you as employment agency, you have of course a relation to companies, and we have also a kind of relation to companies step by step, but I think the dense relation is from company to company. Which experience do you make here? Is it working well? Is the investment, how is the return of investment? So what we tried a lot is to bring them together, to network and to talk together and to get their experience and to be honest, to say, hey, that's too much, that's too less, and this and that, because I think that's perhaps the only way also to get trust that it works at the end in a way, and that it's scalable. So I think that's perhaps one topic, and of course this close relationship what you are having in this ecosystem to learn from each round in a way. No, I think that's that we have this coherence in between the institutions. I think that's really what you describe here. Where I guess that's perhaps something what helps us a lot also now with the collaboration with the employment agency in the German case. Yeah.
All right, Rafaela, I don't know if you want to comment on it. We can, yeah. That was very interesting. Thank you very much. We continue with the poll now. So according to you, what are the main challenges when striking the balance between the interests of the countries involved in a skills mobility partnership? Identify common sector in demands for talents, labor between countries of origin and destination. Rafaela?
That's really interesting and reconforting in a sense, because this, as we have said, this is one of the ideas. It's not the only one. Helen herself said it yesterday. The GSP is one of the model. It's not the Bible. Indeed, the triple win has proved extremely effective in some cases, and other approaches and other models do work as well. But indeed, it is interesting to see that the idea is permeating the room and the virtual room as well, because we truly believe that, and I personally truly believe that some sectors will be on demand everywhere anyway. We are transiting the more and more towards the digital and happily enough towards the green. Therefore, there will be professions that will be in need in Nigeria and in Belgium and in the UK and in the Gulf and in the US and in Canada. And therefore, finding a way to address those needs without impoverishing and without draining the best talents from countries that they're investing in their education systems. Just an example, in Morocco, there are extremely good universities that train talents in the ICT. And there are extremely in need companies elsewhere in the world that look at those talents as potential resources and go and employ them before even they end their university careers. They have a contract in their pockets to go and fly elsewhere. Is it bad? it is not bad. It is wonderful that we give talents an opportunity. But Morocco has invested a lot to have those talents there. Does it mean that we should prevent this from happening? Of course not. It is very important that people have the choice and that take their opportunity where they come. So what I'm saying is just that the GSP is one, I think, very good answer to this challenge. And therefore, I am happy to see that this idea is starting to permeate the environment and the ecosystem. Indeed, there are very different models, but in some sectors, most likely, if we don't act in a responsible way that still meets that area of interest of the famous employers who rightly so are not so concerned about what is fair and what is sustainable, if we don't act in that direction sustainably and institutionally, once again, institution at the core, there will be impoverishment. There will be draining of talent. That will be a race not intended in the best sense of the word, but in the sense of mors tua vita mea, which is not what we want.
No, yes, I think indeed one of the elements maybe that I would add in this balance between the different countries is indeed the system. The system with regards to, let's call it ethical recruitment. The fact indeed that we have rules, that we adhere to those rules, that we work with partners, that make sure, that there is no interference from certain groups, that there is no, exploitation and so on. So I think that this system, this scheme that we're working on, these talent partnerships should embed these elements as well, making sure indeed, that you avoid all kind of risks for these talents, for anyone involved. And I think that there the intermediate organizations, Enabel, GIZ, IOM, and so on, have a role to play. In order to make sure, indeed, that these things are organized transparently and so on and so on.
I think I've put everything on the table.
All right, great. There is a question in the room. Yeah, there is the microphone next to you.
My name is Stefan Persman. I'm from ACV, Belgium's biggest trade union. I'm very much in favor of the skilled mobility partnerships, but there's also, what we see is, the mobility is not there. I mean, there I agree with VDAB. But on the other hand, you see an increasing number on single permits entering the country. You see coming by 1,000 third country nationals arriving in Belgium, with posting systems, with posting with Polish posting systems, or Slovenian or Portuguese. I mean, migrants, third country nationals, migrants are entering Belgium with thousands. So it's not that the employers don't find talents, but maybe skill mobility partnerships and their brothers and sisters are maybe too well organized for employers. Let's say it's, I put the question like this. Because I think this also in protection of the migrant coming to Belgium, I think this is the best way in a trade unionist protecting the worker coming to here. I think this is a clear system where we fully agree on.
Somebody would say.
No, I think it's a good point that you raise, and the statistics show that you are right, and that I think the employers often they choose the path of the less resistance, the easiest way indeed to bring on, the necessary talents. So the question for us is really, what are we promoting here? It's the single permit. How do employers relate to the single permit? What are the obstacles and so forth? Why do they sometimes choose other alternatives to bring people on board? So I think that's a very valid question, and it brings us back to the whole setup, to the whole framework, the risks, the costs for the employer, how is it perceived, and so on and so on. I think you say the mobility is not there yet, or to a very low extent. The question should therefore be, I think, how can we maybe create a step-by-step approach, where we can facilitate and bring employers into our schemes, right? Now the system is foreseen indeed for an immediate job contract with conditions such as salary and so forth. Should we deviate from that? Should we go into alternatives such as shorter-term internships, maybe as a stepping-in process? Should we go into, remote work? The whole COVID crisis has shown that you can actually do a lot of things remotely. Should we keep on pushing for mobility? Is this the request that is there from the private sector? Or should we go into more hybrid forms of cooperation where someone in a foreign country could be working for a Belgian company without necessarily being physically here? All of these are things I think that are up for discussion, and that need to relate to what is the framework, what is the model that we're proposing, and is that indeed sufficiently interesting also for employers? So it's a key question, I think, that you raise. I don't know if any colleagues working directly with hiring companies want to complement, but.
Yeah, hello, I'm Sandra from Link to Europe. This is a Belgium agency specialized in international recruitment. So everything what you say I recognize, and yeah, I know VDAB. I also talk with EURES. So this is our public employment agency. We are a private employment agency, so totally, yeah, similar, but we do something else. We are recruiting candidates outside of Belgium, not only outside of Belgium, but also outside of Europe sometimes. And what I want to say, we are in a contact with both sides, with the candidates and with the employees who are interested to recruit people outside of Belgium. And I want to ask why you don't involve the companies like our in these projects, because it could be interesting, because we go a step further. We organize housing for these people. We can convince them to come here, to take care of them. We take care about the bank accounts and things like that. So I think that it's also something what you miss in all these projects. So this is my question, why we cannot join the club?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, a very easy answer. You are more than welcome to join us. Yes, I mean, we've been in touch in the past also with your colleagues. So, I mean, I truly believe that you guys have probably way more expertise in all of this than we have. And that there's probably, yes, synergies, complementarity between what we do, countries of origin and so on, and what you are looking for here. So I would warmly invite you to get in touch, and we'll happily invite you to cooperate.
All right.
Perhaps a mini remark. I think this is really the competition we have to take, what you said in a way, no? That can we offer a sustainable system which is that easygoing that you go for it in a way, no? And that you think you feel comfortable and the return of investment and everything is right. And of course, also in our case, for example, we are working closely with the Federal Employment Agency, so the model is more or less this one. But I think platforms or something like that would also be an opportunity to involve private agencies and certain standards, no? These ethical recruitment standards, if we have a kind of common understanding how to do it. I think these are all things which can lead to this idea that we have, if it will develop into a direction of war of talent, that we go to the sustainable direction and not to the other. I think that was the past already. So I think that's the key question we will have to answer, and I think you raised it. There are so many things on the way, but of course, as far as the pressure of the demography is not that high, perhaps you feel like the frog in the, remember, yeah.
The screen is red again, but I've been informed we have a few more minutes, so maybe we can take up the next polling question. So what are the common features among EU member states that need to be in place to pass from a country-specific pilot to an EU approach for skills mobility? And I see that the number one was the applicability of EU skills recognition framework for non-EU talents. Rafaela,
yeah,
I see
first
you nodding.
and second, first and second, they're really at the core of what we've been discussing. So I'm happy we are on the same page. We've talked about knowing what kind of human capital and skills and talents we're talking about reciprocally, not just among EU member states, but with the partner countries. But also, Rob raised a point earlier this morning on data, and the data do not only refer to talents and skills that are available, but also needs, because indeed we do have the analysis that are macro and sometimes meso on the sectors that are in need, but then what we have experienced, and I agree very much with what the colleagues from the trade union said, although there are needs on the labor market, and although some of them are filled more or less naturally, in inverted commas, we do not manage to have the perfect match that we would like to have. So I think that they're beyond the talent pool or whatever other tool that we can develop on the side of the skills, the other side remain extremely important, not just to have a clearer understanding of what the needs, not just in terms of sectors, but in terms of professions, and even more detailed in terms of within the profession, really what are the skills and what are the talents that are so difficult to be found in the national or common European labor market. So there, I think that we always think, and I smile to Lenka because we have discussed this a lot, we always tend to think that it's very difficult to have a clearer understanding of labor market needs in third countries because they look so far away. But I think that within Europe and within European countries, we really do have this this challenge, and this will be one of the bits of the pieces, the Celta, we were saying this also yesterday, that will help build global GSPs or other models of partnership in a way that they really respond to something that is pressing now. And since we have heard from VDAB, and we hear it from many other colleagues from other employment service, we need results, we need to prove that we invest time and that the vacancies are filled. If you really manage to identify the bits, the segment where effectively talents are needed, there is the key entry point, because the champions are the entry points. We have heard it from the cabinet of our Secretary of State yesterday. We need to prove that it works. We need to prove that even if there is mobility, there are people coming in, that's not enough. We still we are still missing the talents that make our labor market really work better.
All right. If I may conclude then, or Rob, do you want to jump in on it?
No, I fully agree with everything that was said. I think indeed there's a question, by the way, over there. But I think indeed that skills assessment is probably a key thing to look into, right? We all have our different ways to assess, the value of a diploma, the value of a candidate, a CV. It's very much document-based, right? What's the CV and then the diploma and so on. But obviously people have skills, and I always take the example of this great, developer from Nigeria, and you ask like, wow, you can do all of this, but where did you study? Well, and then he says like on YouTube, right? And so then you're like, okay, but this is a problem, right? Yeah, if you don't have a document, you don't have a diploma, and you will probably get more and more of these cases, right? And so the question really is, how do we cope with that? And this system that we have in place now, there's elements that are positive about it, but it's also true that it's really full of obstacles. It's very time intensive. You need a lot of time to run it through the system and so forth. And so it, in a way, makes you less attractive on the international scene, right? If you have very lengthy, cumbersome procedures, while other countries have adapted, have shown more flexibility. This is also competing for talents. It's the systems that are competing for talents, and you can see that countries that can bring in people easily and rapidly have a certain attractiveness also with the talents, right? While others, that are more complex, indeed are maybe not in the top list of destination countries.
Perhaps just to build on that, because I think it's a very interesting point to see if we, of course, start to to open a new phase of relationship also to our partner countries, where migration is perhaps higher on the agenda in terms of mutual interest. It's also the question, if we would start as Europe, of course, if you have 2020, 2020, 2020, then we have very fast 500 people starting to come to Europe. And it's, of course, another way also for the partner countries, because the partner countries put it also on the agenda. They have demographic pressure on the one hand, if growth and demographic growth is not going aligned. So I think it's clear how could we engage to find solutions for this new balance. And I think this is also perhaps something in between the lines, how it makes a lot of sense to act as a European united in a way. No?
Right, thank you very much. I'm afraid we ran out of time.
Take the two questions.
Yeah, if it's a short question, let's take one question. Yes.
I think there's two.
Yes. Hello, my name is. Can you hear me? Yeah.
No.
My name is Diana Stefanescu. I'm a labor mobility specialist at the Migration Partnership Facility at ICMPD. For those of you who don't know, the Migration Partnership Facility, we are basically the funding mechanism through which a lot of these pilot projects are being funded. We financed 9 out of 11 of the pilot projects of the past and ongoing pilot projects, and including PALIM, but also PEMWECO that are in our portfolio. And so I'm really grateful to be here and to listen to you all reflecting on a lot of things that we also hear from the other partners in our projects. It was a really interesting discussion in that sense. I wanted to kind of pick up on this last point that Björn just made about kind of how we can all work together more in these projects. I feel like, we're funding all these projects, and most of them are bilateral, they're like with one member state in the lead. And of course, there are already multi-EU member state approaches that are being piloted, but I feel like it's still very much in its infancy. I wanted to hear from you what you thought was needed, what you would need for those projects to work more together. Where do you still see limitations? What do you need in terms of coordination mechanisms that would help you to be able to join forces more and maybe also interact with the partner countries in a more united way as EU countries in this? Thank you.
If we could,
we're all silent because we are droning the coordination mechanism.
I don't know who starts. I think we.
I think one of the answers is we should have more possibilities to exchange, just as we're having today, right? I think today and yesterday have already shown, that there's different visions, different models, different stakeholders involved, and the fact that we get to know each other, that we get to discuss together, probably will lead to some form of convergence towards, yes, maybe we have to build on those synergies, maybe we have to look at this jointly and so forth. So any type of, I think, platform or possibility to exchange also between member states, and that's maybe also a role for the European Migration Network, I think could be beneficial in that sense.
It's just too good an opportunity to speak a little bit about just the Labour Mobility Practitioners Network that we're hosting in the MPF. And it's a relatively new initiative, so maybe not everyone knows about it. But it's basically this network of professionals from different sectors, public and private, that offers opportunities for stakeholders to come together to talk more and dive deeper into discussions than we can do today. So just for those of you who don't know it yet, do check it out. I think it's exactly what Rob is talking about.
No. We're
to build on this. To build on this, I think also the question is now, as we see on national level, the complexity is super high, and how to get coherence in it, and how to get the different perspectives into one approach. So do it with different countries, of course, get it even more complex. But I guess it's the question where we start the discussion. I can imagine, for example, why not starting in the partner countries where we are working, for example. And if you do a project there, could it be interesting for another partner country or something like that? So, or a member country or something into that direction, that we find ties where it's quite pragmatic perhaps to go the next step. But I think perhaps this stage will start by now. I think everybody was very busy to find its way already, and still we are on search, I guess. But it's needed, of course. And of course this kind of sounding boards or something, mechanisms like that perhaps could also help, of course.
If I may use the moderator card, we're over time. So I think here we can conclude the discussion, which was, I think, personally very interesting and a very good basis for the discussion of this afternoon. So if people have questions that they have not been able to ask, we have lunch served, there is the online chat, and we have another discussion this afternoon. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, Rafaela, and Björn. And well, the people here have a good sandwich. I think I pass the floor still to my colleague Daphne, who's going.
No, but you have already said the essential. But thank you very much to the panelists for this very rich overview. I think I would like just to remind the audience of one very interesting word that you said, Björn, that the skills mobility partnerships are space to create. I find it a very nice summary of our discussion that will be continued this afternoon. So please also keep your questions to actually feed our conversation this afternoon that will focus very much on how to bridge the gap between talents and employers, how to build a robust, sustainable and yet ethical system. I think this is also one of the ingredients that the panelists have mentioned. So for the participants online, we will resume our work at 1:20 after our lunch break. And for the participants that are with us in real life, please join us in the patio for the lunch break. But thank you very much to you all.